Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Advocata Studio. And today we have a very interesting topic of medical education. And joining us here in the studio is Dr. Sujata Gamage, who is a leading voice in education policy to help us just unpack how a sustainable and inclusive, a credible model for education could look like in Sri Lanka today. Doctor, thank you for joining us. It is so nice to have you with
Thank you for
us
having me.
again. So just really going into the conversation we have on for today, because earlier this year there was a storm of controversy over this whole KDU of how they were not letting local students in and were only open to the military personnel and international students. So this whole policy thing they brought up, what was your take when you first heard about it?
Um, I expected that
Okay.
because private medical education for local students, we've had starts and stops since 1982, I think, right?
Okay.
1982. And I was waiting for this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Not anticipated this. I expected this to
Mm-hmm.
happen.
And just looking at the process of policymaking, what would you say is like the from a policymaking standpoint, what is like this process? Was it a top down or was it only a decision made by the Ministry of Defense and not really a collaborative decision? Because it needs more collaboration between them and also just to be worked on and looked at. So how would you look at it from a policy making
Yeah,
point?
actually, it's been more about politics than policy.
Mm-hmm.
But to the government's credit, the government since 1980,
Mm-hmm.
there was a really good attempt for good education policy.
Mm-hmm.
The white paper by Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe in 1982 was amazing document. People who just school children went were protesting. Nobody's read that.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time a really comprehensive policy for education was laid out, and it was a white paper for collaboration consultation.
Mm-hmm.
It was toned down, and there was actually there were people who were not happy with the government, so it became an anti-government symbol,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just torn apart and ridiculed and just demonized.
Yes.
Then from then on, I don't think any government ever produced any white paper. They learned from that.
Mm-hmm.
So since then, what we have is what I call stealth policy.
Mm-hmm.
And stealth policy because there is protests and opposition, illogical, totally politically motivated opposition. So in response, what you have is stealth policy.
Mm-hmm.
So stealth policy creates, illogical responses. Illogical responses create stealth policy. So it's been a, self-fulfilling thing. And so we don't have any good policy making since the white paper was trashed in 1982. If you want to know more about it, in 1982, along with a really good plan for public education, J.R. Jayawardena government introduced private medical education, Ragama.
Mm-hmm.
But that was introduced in a stealthy way because they were burned by the reaction to the white. So it was stealth policy, right? It was established, and there were no conversation about it. They had the power, so they established, and people went berserk. There were protests, and so I think one student was killed directly as a result, and so many others were killed. Their names are there. You can hear our students commemorating, every year their deaths, and it had to be pulled back, closed in 1989, and absorbed to University of California.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first episode of privatization attempt, stealth policy.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't blame the government because they could not bring it otherwise also. Then the second attempt was in Saitam, 2008.
Yes.
Dr. Neville Fernando, he sold his, clinic, his hospital, and he established, and somebody said, if he establish a casino, there won't be any protest. But he established. But again, it was not a straightforward thing because you could not have direct conversation. The government is scared to even talk about private education. So again, in 2008, they opened, admitted students, there were protests and non-stop. And the GMO joined in. And 2018, another government, 2008, the UPFA government, and 2008, the UMP government, they came with this patchwork where they were absorbed to the KDU. And of course, it was to be continued, right?
Yes.
So 2008, they absorbed, 2018, they absorbed, I think, about almost 200 students were enrolled there. And they started advertise for new batch of students in 2024. Very good process, right? But it is, I think, this government, based on their track record, they have put a stop to that, but they have to give up explanation, right? So we are waiting for that. So this is the third time around, and I think we can't have the repeats of the first two, the Ragam incident and the Saitam. Here we have to have an open conversation and have what I call a middle path for medical education. On one hand, students have absolutely no private education, and the other side saying, freedom of education for all. So, and that we should be saving money. It's mostly economic arguments on one side, equity arguments on the other side. You have to bring those together for a middle path, I think.
What would you say is your take on equity in medical education? Just maybe diving more towards that.
Yeah. Equity is, take USA, there's actually equity in medical education there in this way. If you take the highest ranked university, highest ranked medical college, Harvard Medical School, their application rate is 3%. So that 3% the applications are entertained. And their MCAT, the qualifying exam, the minimum is 520. And if you go to the lowest ranked medical college, say University of Mississippi Medical College, the acceptance rate is about 37%. But MCAT, they ask for 500 or more. Okay? So you can borrow. It's very expensive. You borrow and you pay. Anybody can borrow if they meet this 500 to 520 MCAT. So they have a specific standard. And doesn't matter whether you have money or not, you have to meet that. So I think in Sri Lanka, I think we don't have that. So equity would be somebody has to set a stand, say, for a medical education, it's so competitive, certain standard, and say, doesn't matter whether you have money or not, you need to meet this standard.
And in terms of like this whole why they wanted to not include local students was the whole internalization, the university. So what would your take be on like how the doors are open for international students, but not really the local students?
Yeah, that's not fair. That's not fair. But also, it's a military school.
Yes.
So technically, it's like, we should have we can have a really good military school. But, in Sri Lanka, we have workarounds. Because there isn't enough investment, public investment in higher education. We have to have, additional investments. And this is the way to bring it in, right? In various insidious ways. So Minister of Defense opened it for non-military students for other subjects, law, and there are other subjects.
Commerce, arts, and everything.
Yeah. And that's because you really, you can't bring private investment. This is just another part of the government which has more autonomy. They brought in. They should not have. But, that's Sri Lanka. We need to expand higher education opportunities. So I think, so it's really capricious to say, you can have for law and not for medical education.
Mm.
But then, as I said, you can take medical education and take that separately and say, okay, but is there equity in the way the admissions are made? In other cases also, no. Law, I guess, there are people who would not, we don't have a standard for law education like for medical education. Say in the US, I think even law may have a LSAT, no?
LSAT,
Yeah. When it's highly competitive, these standards are sort of set, naturally they get set. So, yeah, if that's highly competitive, we need to have a national standard and stay within that. KDU says when you look at their numbers, they actually have pretty good standards. But it's like Caesar's wife. They have to be, better than the best. They have to be above it. So I think the way to go is for them to get their standards approved by a government authority. Right now, the UGC sets standards for all the medical faculties. For different districts, you have a different cutoff. I think why have it for all the private institutions as well, right? They have to be given sets within this. This is the minimum you need to enter KDU. You should have it set not by KDU, but by some other authority.
And even with EZ scores, because EZ scores are it's different across the districts we have.
Yes.
So do you think that's not a very fair way to assess in a national point of view?
No, I think it takes both merit and need into account. So it's fair. I think it's a fair way to assess, but it's been compromised because people who study in Colombo, they go and apply from different districts. But district basis is for equity. Okay, it's for equity. So to enter University of Colombo from the Colombo district, I think you need about, I just looked up this 2.5 or something minimum. And for Noor Elia district or somewhere, it would be much less. I think there's a formula they use to determine that. For private schools, maybe they don't need to go district-wise. But as I said, in the US, it's set by the market. Even University of Mississippi, they say, no, we won't accept anybody below 500 MCAT, right? But in Sri Lanka, we don't have enough of a market. So we really need an authority to determine what is a minimum. And I think even KDU should abide by that.
And you mean even the state and the private universities both need to abide by the standard?
Yes. But the thing is, another thing that the students and those who are against private education, when I say they have to come to the middle, so we are saying, no, we need Z-score, accept the C-score, accept those standards, and even the private schools should abide by that. Then they are really against having one authority to regulate all this, right? I was involved in the National Education Policy Framework by the previous government, Ms. Ranil Wickremesinghe. And one of the things is to establish a higher education commission which addresses, which is really serves the education seekers, all education seekers, We're not born with private, public, scratched on our forehead. No, we are all the youth are, youth of this country, whether they go to public or private. So there was really big resistance to that. I think that's another conversation we should have, why we need one authority to regulate all. Because, it's not only well-to-do now who go to these private schools, all kinds of people, youth from all walks of life go to these. So one authority, but right now at least we have something called non-state education division in the Ministry of Higher Education. So they can do that, but they have to, UGC is supposed to deal with only
the state.
Public.
Yes.
And they're serving the public institution. They should be serving the public. Higher education seeking public. So, but at least we have some mechanism, and I think they should set something, I think, going forward, because they said it's temporary suspension they're considering. So we really need to make representation to government saying, no, you can't just, scrap these applications like this. You need to maybe bring in new standards.
Standards. So you mentioned something about the non-state division. So what do they really regulate? Is that
The non-state institutions,
okay?
yes, there are so many. The University Grants Commission kind of wash the hands of saying, as long as these, because they don't award local degrees.
Mm-hmm.
To award a local degree, they have to go one program at a time and get approval from the
Higher
UGC.
UGC.
SLEED, Sri Lanka Institute of Information
Mm-hmm.
Technology. So they got so many approved, but it's easier for them to offer a foreign degree.
Okay.
So then the criteria is if that's registered with there are two registers, international registers. If they're in the register, then you can follow those programs if they're offered locally. So other than that, there's no regulation of the private space,
Okay.
right? If one of these close overnight, and what do these students do? They spend for 2 years of education.
Yes.
So there's no safeguard. That's really, really unfair. That's not really not democratic. So yeah, we do need a good regulatory institution for all institutions.
All institutions. And when it comes to medical education in Sri Lanka, what would you say is like in terms of privatization or the private investment we come in? Do you think that's a good way moving forward to bring in?
Absolutely. Because in Sri Lanka, compared to other countries in the region, we spend higher percent of our education budget on university education. This is pointed out by World Bank in 2003. I've been talking about it since 2003. And that percentage I've been calculating. So like 600 billion was the amount for last year for all of education. I think for higher education it was close to 100 billion, right? But that as a percent, that percentage has been increasing. And what's going into school education, take this. For A-level classes, only 1/3 of schools have the science stream. And we've been talking about it since 2003. I mean, we have to put money there, right? Actually, they have been putting money, but the governance issues, but we have to have that. I'm saying it's not by putting more money, but changing the governance structure. But anyway, without doing that, we are putting more and more money into higher education. So I think the argument I would make is more money for school education. The public sector should not be investing more on higher education because we have so much. Next year, we are going to have less money because the growth this year is less than expected. So there'll be real issues coming for the budget next year. So what I'm saying is private investments are a must. Maybe we don't have to advocate. The government will realize it by next year when they do the budget. Right? So private investments have to come from the private sector. And that has to be allocated in an equitable manner. That's where we learn from the opposition, those who oppose. Because we have not been looking at the equity side. We are saying we need more investments. But let me give an example. Say the cutoff is 1.85. Somebody who gets 1.84 in the third attempt does not go to get to a public university, but doesn't have money. What about that person? Okay. Yeah. But then somebody who has 1.48 or something gets admission because they have money, right? So there is a real inequity there. So so we need to that person with the 1.45 may not be, they should be able to borrow, and for medical education they can. But we need to address that issue. Somebody because they have a lower mark and more money and lower score going into medical education, that is an issue.
So your suggestion or your recommendation would be more towards bringing in a standardized way of
Yes, for private also. Get them, yeah. The KDU is establishing this what's a minimum C score. No, it should be established by
The
same authority that
authority, yes.
establishes the minimum scores for the private public institutions.
Institutions.
I think that would be I think, a way to get out of the equity situation.
And moving into a bit more interesting is looking at policy and politics. I think you would have a lot to say on this, but really seeing and trying to understand, because we talk about how we could become an education hub and really get more people coming into Sri Lanka for education. But when something like this with KDU happens, where they just close off the doors for the local students and only be very inclusive or be exclusive, sorry, about this. So, would you say that this would really bring in a disadvantage where more people would want to move out of the country?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know somebody who's
Already
gone,
left, yeah.
yeah, and paying for their education. But I think the University of Colombo and all of them should have a certain percent set apart for fee-paying students. Again, meeting their Z-score
Score
criteria,
criteria.
right? So they should. No, then why would they, if they meet? No, not 2.54 and then say anybody within falling within, say, 0.1% of that or 1% of that, they can pay and
Pay
come.
income, yes.
Not anybody says it's 2.5, then anybody between 2.4 and 5, they can pay and come. So then it's not like, just because you have money you can go, but you are, because why would somebody with 2.50 and 2.49, what's the difference, right? So I think the rationale would be those who just could not make, who are close to making the cutoff, should be allowed to pay and
Pay and come
come.
in.
So that will inject a lot of more money into the public system. And those could be international students also. Right.
And even with this decision which they announced, do you think it was a decision which was politically driven, or was in an ideology, but not really consulted among the doctors? And it's not only one ministry, right? It has the defense ministry in there, the health ministry, and the education ministry. So, what would your take be on in terms of that?
It was 100% political decision.
Yes.
I don't think anybody even looked at any numbers, nothing.
Yes.
It was 100% political decision.
And to do something like this at a stage where there are doctors moving out of our country and there is a shortage of doctors in our country, and if it's not allowing the local students who are willing and wanting to study but are not being allowed, is, I think, something which we all need to think about. And I also feel like the mandates across these ministries are very overlapping. What would you say
No,
about that?
actually, this government, I did a TV show on this. No, it's one of the most scientific ministries you can have. Yeah,
Yes.
scientific cabinets you can have. That I have to say, right? Verity Research did something on, there are 10 sort of subject areas, and within those 10 there are sub areas. So you can sort of break the main areas into several sub areas, and actually, except media always gets thrown around. I think media is with the health ministry,
Okay.
right? Because somebody who they think is a good media person gets that. Media and something else gets, tourism, some gets thrown around.
Okay.
There's few like that, but otherwise this is one of the most scientific
Scientific.
cabinets.
Yes.
Right? No, there's no overlap. We have one Minister of Education,
Yes.
Minister of Health. They have to, of course, coordinate about medical education. No, I think it's not an issue. It's just that, but I think the spokesman said that this is going to be considered. So I think this is a really good time to put forward a good brief from outside, policy brief, because I don't think, I don't know, maybe this government hasn't shown us that they have any kind of preparation for making policy decisions. So there's really a case for making a good policy brief. As I said, how to come to a middle path here.
And when you mean middle path, if you could maybe explain that a bit more.
Yes, as I said, the proponents of private medication looking at the economics of it, and the opposition looks at the equity side of it. So I think bringing those both concerns together, economic and efficiency in this side, that we need more doctors, and so on. So we need to bring both concerns together, and I think both sides have been just not hearing each other in that regard. I was on this side arguing for economic side, and then I realized there is a equity concern. There is indeed. So we need to address that.
And this equity concern is not only for the medical education, but just higher education in general.
It's equity really comes in when there's a high demand, right? So for arts faculties, the men are voting with their feet. It's 90% women now in some faculties. 70, on average, about 75%. And the rest of the men, actually, a lot of priests there, right? Think about finding a partner going into university, okay? Forget that. So, no, equity issue you get intensified when there's a lot of competition, when there's a when there's a lot of high demand for any sector. So it's there, but medical education stands out. For some reason, engineering, it's not so much. Engineering, we have the Institute of Engineers, which's been giving qualifications for those with NDT, for them to get the charter, engineering charter. Somehow for engineering, the demand does not seem to be so much. But for medicine, yes. Because there's always the math side and the biological side. There's always the math side is merit, it's a little harder to get in. So, but the biological side, there's so many people who qualify, and there's such a demand for the medical profession.
And do you think it's also important, like the outputs, for example, when doctors or anyone are supposed to do exams, how do you think we could improve in terms of our structure when it comes to the outputs of like exams and accreditation and things like that?
Yeah. Well, our medical sector is by the doctors, for the doctors, of the doctors. Our Sri Lanka Medical Council, I've written an article on that, comparing it with the UK Medical Council. There are no doctors in the UK Medical Council. Our medical council is composed 100% of doctors.
Yes.
Medical deans, GMO has representation, and various specialties. They're all doctors. Actually, it should be with the users of the medical service, should be in the medical council.
That's
So
a very
that
good point,
is, we should at least get 1/3 of the members in the SLFC from outside. So there you go. I mean, just there's no input from the patients, from the users into the how medical those decisions are made. So that is the first place to correct. We need, I don't know whether this government will do it. I don't know politically how we have to think about it. But it's a political argument for that. But that is the place. No, we are spending so much money on, on curative medicine and the preventive medicine side, non-communicable diseases on the rise, and there should be so much education about nutrition, about good habits. That's not happening.
The public health side of it.
We have clinics in the remotest parts of the country, and we are doling out, cholesterol, medicine for cholesterol and for pressure and for sugar. But the intake of sugar in the country, who's speaking for that? You put 3 teaspoons of sugar in your tea, So, no, I think there's really no public input into how our medical system is run. It is totally run by doctors for doctors. So that is the first place to start, the Sri Lanka Medical Council.
And they do take the strongest decisions out there as well. So
absolutely,
it really
it's a trade union.
Yes.
So we have a trade union making policy, medical policy. So there's a serious issue there. But when it comes to medical education, at least we can just we are not talking about system change anymore. You have to change
Go into
one thing at a time. So, but
yes.
medical education, I see ways of bringing the two sides together.
Mhm. And would you have any other way the government could have done this differently in terms of
The KDU
yes.
or anything to do with higher education. Actually, since this government came to power, I decided I'm not going to talk about higher education
Okay.
because I thought it's let them make the decisions in because of internal contradictions. Let something happen
Mhm.
because the truth is this government came to power thanks to their thanks to them unsettling, creating, chaos in the university system.
System.
They came to power through that,
Mhm.
The 6% for education was a big argument, which is nobody, 6% of GDP for education when our whole budget is sometimes less than 10%.
That.
10%.
Yes.
I mean, those kinds of arguments, and then the ragging,
Mm.
all that was behind how this political movement was built up.
Mm.
So, but this government has, been pragmatic. So I'm hoping that when the time for the next budget comes, they will,
Think.
the reality of, balancing the
Mhm.
budget will make them better higher education policy. But
Mhm.
as is, I think this was inevitable. They came. These protests, item protests, were a big part of
The whole
the build-up
movement.
of
Yes.
JVP, right? So this was at least this is this pausing of this application. This is a pause, they
Mhm.
said, is inevitable. But I think with enough civil society intervention, maybe we can, make some modifications in that.
They've also mentioned how it's gonna be a defense university, full on full, as well. I think the Prime Minister mentioned that in
Yeah.
Parliament. What would you more talk
Um,
about that?
yes, but then are we going to take away the other opportunities for other students
Come.
as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it should be at the end of the day, we should not take away opportunities unless you create something else.
Else, yes.
So I think, yes, they should go there. Maybe they should have some plan to maybe in 10 years it becomes a military university, totally good defense
Mm-hmm.
university. But why take away opportunities when we should be creating more opportunities? Maybe it should be done gradually.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea. I mean, I don't know, we should have done that soon after the 2009 end of the war, capitalizing on, our experience
Mm-hmm.
in that war. Maybe it's now, I don't know whether we have the expertise or the credibility to establish a top rate defense university.
Mm-hmm.
But that we can't do that overnight and just again displace all the students, civilians who are enrolled in the system. Because I think that equity and opportunity, I mean, both those have to be considered.
Yes. And also just maybe going back a bit, maybe understand a bit more on the SITEM issue. What would you say? I mean, obviously it's a lot of politics in there, but a lot of people were impacted through that, and I think a lot of and it was a bit uncertain at that time on what would happen to these students. But how could we have avoided something like that from happening?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the politics of 2008 to 2018. 2008 to 15, we had an all-powerful government.
Mm-hmm.
So this was the only way they could, protest against the government. So I don't, and I think that 2008, the government supported every time the government, behind the scenes, government supported, the establishment of SITEM. Could we have set up a private education act at that time?
Mm-hmm.
Because Bangladesh came up with the Private Education Act in 1980s, right? Formally recognized private education, set up a regulatory. I think the Rajapaksa government had you know, the chance to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
they were playing a sort of double game. There's
Yes, as well.
So definitely not Gotabe government. They also did not think, they thought they could ride it with force. And the Ranil Wickremesinghe government, they always sidestep the issue. They don't address. No, I don't think we could have brought a policy. And I think if anybody can, I think maybe this government can. Right? So, yeah, I think by addressing the KDU issue, if we can get civilian local students admitted to in a manner that is acceptable, that takes equity considerations.
Standard,
So
yes.
some of the people who applied and got qualified may not be able to come for the 2026. They're sorry, we have new criteria. I don't know whether they'll go to the courts and, whether they get on a human rights, their rights have been violated on an individual level. I actually checked with the lawyers, with the Bar Association, whether this could be a rights issue, fundamental rights. But the argument was that no, the KDU could argue it's a policy issue. But individuals could go to for their individual application, maybe Human Rights Commission and so on. But I think we'll have to say, even KDU, only certain number within this score will qualify, will go with. So, yeah, I think if we can come to that would have been, at least we have people know what to expect. Like in the US, as I said, it's, if you don't have an MCAT score between 500 and 520, you can't go to medical school, no matter how much money you have. I think we should have the same assurance here, unless you have a C score, and C score A-level exam is not a good exam. That has to, those who write the exam and qualify and go to medical school, I forget which, there was an article, paper, that they actually fare very poorly. They fare in the theoretical side of the exam in UK, but not the other papers that deal with the socio-emotional and other aspects of the medical profession. So it is not a good qualification. It's not the best. C score is not the best indicator. KDU has an interview. They look at this. So there's a better process. I don't think we can ever have an interview process here in Sri Lanka. It's too small country, and you can't. I think there's always going to be influence and interference. So we'll have to go with the C score. It can be improved. The A-level exam can be improved. Right now we offer 50, 60 plus subjects. Department, I don't know how they said this. In 2 papers for most subjects, in 3 languages, they must be just copying and pasting at a rate. So the Chinese Gao Kao, the Chinese equivalent has only 12 subjects. Right?
60 is a lot.
60 is a lot. So we can reduce the number of subjects and elevate the quality of the papers. So that can be done. But for the time being, I think we can live with that. But like the MCAT, have one system for everybody, public or private. I think that would be one step in the right direction. I think.
Because at the end of the day, we really need to think about who this is impacting. And these are the students who are wanting to study, but because of just change in regulations and just, like imagine a rural student somewhere in Ratnapura or somewhere who would want to study medicine, has the Z score, but has no option of like getting into such funded universities.
There's always that. I mean, there are so many students, people in the US who can't get more than 500.
Yeah.
And, they're out, and you have more than 500, then actually you can borrow money and go to medical school. I think even here it's a case, right? For medical profession, I think you can still borrow money and go to university. So, of course, you can't, it's a highly competitive field. There's limited number of places and not everybody's, but we do, but we have to make sure that it appears to be equitable, across the board. Right now, it is not actually. KDU, it's there are people who could not as I said, it should be, say, minimum cutoff, and within a certain range, we should allow, not anybody lower than that. So, KDU, I'm sure there'll be some people who would be there because they can pay.
Any other recommendation you would like to share, Doctor, in terms of just medical education or just education as a whole in Sri Lanka, and how maybe the next 10 years, even for this current government, and what would you suggest or
I
recommend?
think we're spending too much time talking about higher education because they are the ones with the loudest voice. I think school education should be our priority. And primary education, there are curricular reforms happening, but the exams, the 3 exams have to change. Doesn't matter how much, we really don't need too much change in the curricula. We looked at the curricula. It all depends on the exam. The teachers teach the exam. So the 3 exams have to change, and this government is, I don't know, but that is a key issue. And decentralization.
Yes.
We have 10,000 schools, and actually, as I said, 97, only 360 are national schools, but they are also managed and assisted by the provincial councils. Education is one area where I think the provincial system works. So we need to, and there was a plan to cluster the schools, say about 10 schools in one cluster where they, have where there's flexibility in sharing teachers. All those decentralization plans are there. These are not happening because people in the ministries, they like to stay in Colombo. We have a ministry which really, most of the departments, I don't know why they exist. We don't need, because we have really good capacity at provincial, zonal level to run the school systems. So I think decentralization and
I think also very
reform the exam.
passionate people as well who are wanting to really lead the next generation.
You mean in the provinces?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm really surprised. There
Yeah,
are
it's
some
actually very
really
inspiring.
good, capable people. I just personally know 2 provincial directors. It turns out there's this one batch of, they were recruited at the same time. These are amazing people. These 2 ladies, one in the Eastern Province, the other one is the Sabaragam Province. We are working with both of them on a project, amazing. So there's so much innovation. So actually what we need is, we have 9 provinces. The center just has to, like orchestrate
everything.
set KPIs and, reward them accordingly. So that's what I like to see, the center being the coordinator, the facilitator. I told you about, I'm rereading Small is Beautiful. Actually, it's not just about all small. It talks about the balance of the small and the global and the national. We need the freedom of lots and lots of small units, but the unity and coordination some unity and coordination at the global and national level. So right now, our government is trying to do everything, central government. So in education, especially. Really, because the school system, they can function on their own. The provinces are doing a good job. So decentralization of administration 100% to those smallest units, and reform the exams. That's those 2 things is all you need to do.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I think it was very insightful just to really see how a well governed system that just not only meets the country's healthcare needs, but respects the public investment and also the students, and who maybe having open, equitable opportunities is always the best way forward. Would you have any other closing remarks on this whole topic we've spoken about?
Yeah, no, just equity and efficiency. We need to balance the 2. Okay. So saying the 2 sides in this particular debate, stuck on 2 sides, we need to bring the 2 together.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening to us all this time. Please subscribe and share across all our platforms. We do very interesting topics across all our platforms: Advocata Plus, Advocata Kural, and Advocata Institute. Stay tuned and stay curious, stay critical, and we'll catch you in the next episode.